Commander Velthak leaned back in his command chair, his four eyes scanning through thousands of planetary records on his holographic display. The lights of his flagship dimmed as he searched through the galactic archives for his next conquest. As a rising star in the Dominion's military, he needed another easy victory to secure his promotion to Fleet Admiral. His clawed fingers danced across the control interface, filtering out heavily defended worlds and advanced civilizations. He had no interest in costly battles that would damage his reputation. What he needed was a soft target, something that would surrender quickly and make him look like a brilliant strategist. Then he found it. A small blue planet on the outer rim of a spiral galaxy, spinning peacefully around a yellow star. The classification tag made him pause and then smile with satisfaction. Low risk, primitive species. The planet was called Earth, and according to the survey data, it was inhabited by creatures called humans. Velthak opened the detailed report, his excitement growing with each line. The survey was old, nearly 2,000 years, but that only made things better. The humans were described as barely above animals. They lived in small tribal groups, used simple tools made of stone and metal, and spent most of their time fighting each other over territory and resources. They had no space travel, no energy weapons, and no understanding of advanced technology. The report painted a picture of a species that would probably worship his ships as gods when they arrived. The humans apparently believed in multiple deities and performed strange rituals to please them. They would likely surrender immediately once they saw the power of the Dominion fleet. Velthak calculated the resources he would need. Against such a primitive world, he could get away with a small force, maybe 150 ships, just enough to look impressive in the sky above their planet, but not so many that the Dominion Council would question why he needed such overwhelming force against Stone Age primitives. He began composing his mission request, already imagining the commendations and promotions that would follow. This Earth would be the easiest conquest of his career. Meanwhile, billions of light-years away, Admiral Hyun-Soo Kim stood in the command center of the Earth defense ship Aegis. The massive vessel hung silently in space, invisible to conventional sensors, thanks to technology that the rest of the galaxy couldn't even imagine. At 47 years old, Kim had spent his entire adult life preparing for this exact moment. The bridge around him buzzed with quiet activity. His crew moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had trained for decades for a single purpose. Every person on this ship, and the dozens of others hidden throughout the solar system, knew that today might be the day humanity revealed itself to the galaxy. Kim watched the long-range detection displays with calm eyes. The sensors showed a fleet of alien ships moving toward Earth, still weeks away at their current speed. These weren't the first aliens to head toward Earth, but they were the largest group so far. Previous alien visitors had been explorers or small research vessels that turned back when they detected what appeared to be a pre-industrial civilization. This fleet was different. It was big enough to be an invasion force. Lieutenant Yoon-ji Park, his communications officer, looked up from her station. At 28, she was one of the youngest officers on the bridge, but she had spent her entire career studying alien languages and communication protocols. She knew 17 different alien languages fluently and could understand basic communication in over 40 others. "Admiral," she said quietly, "the alien fleet just sent out a standard Dominion military broadcast. They're requesting reinforcement schedules and supply line confirmations. This is definitely an invasion force." Kim nodded slowly. He had expected this day would come eventually. Humanity had been watching the galaxy for over 2 centuries, learning about the various alien civilizations, their technologies and their habits. They knew about the Dominion and their expansion policies. They knew that sooner or later, someone would look at Earth and decide it was worth conquering. "How long until they arrive?" Kim asked. 18 days at their current speed," Park replied. Kim walked to the main viewing screen, which showed the peaceful blue marble of Earth spinning below them. From here, it looked exactly like the primitive world described in those ancient galactic archives. No signs of advanced civilization, no obvious technology, no space-based infrastructure. Just a quiet planet with blue oceans and green continents. That was exactly how humanity wanted it to look. Send the activation signal to all fleet commanders, Kim ordered. Begin Phase 1 protocols, and Lieutenant Park. He turned to his communications officer with a slight smile. Prepare a welcome message for our visitors in perfect Dominion standard language. Park's fingers flew across her console, composing a message that would shatter Commander Velthak's expectations completely. As she worked, she couldn't help but smile. The aliens thought they were coming to conquer a primitive world, but they were about to discover that Earth's humans had been expecting them all along. The message was simple, but devastating. Dominion Fleet, we have been monitoring your approach. Please state your intentions in Sol System space. The moment Commander Velthak's fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth, he knew something was terribly wrong. His ship's sensors should have detected a quiet, primitive world with maybe some basic radio signals. Instead, his screens lit up like a festival display, showing energy signatures that made no sense according to his understanding of human technology. Commander, his sensor operator called out nervously, I'm reading massive power sources all around the planet. These readings, they're stronger than our own mothership generators. Velthak leaned forward in his command chair, his confidence beginning to crack. That's impossible. Check your equipment. The humans are supposed to be using wooden clubs and stone knives. Before his crew could respond, space around the Dominion fleet began to shimmer like heat waves on a summer day. One by one, human ships appeared out of nowhere, as if they had been invisible moments before. These weren't the crude metal boxes that Velthak had expected. Instead, sleek vessels with smooth curves and no visible weapons materialized in perfect formation around his fleet. The human ships were beautiful in a way that made Velthak's practical military vessels look clumsy and outdated. They moved through space with an elegance that suggested technology far beyond anything in the Dominion archives. Worse still, there were dozens of them, and more kept appearing as if summoned from thin air. Sir, his communications officer stammered, we're receiving a transmission. It's in perfect Dominion standard language, using military encryption protocols. Velthak's blood ran cold. Those encryption codes were classified at the highest levels of Dominion military command. No primitive species should know they even existed, let alone be able to use them correctly. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the lead human vessel. Admiral Hyun-Soo Kim stood calmly in the center of a command center that looked like something from the Dominion's most advanced research facilities. The human wore a crisp uniform and had the bearing of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Dominion Fleet, Kim said in flawless Dominion language, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. This is Admiral Kim of Earth Defense. You are in violation of Sol System sovereignty. State your intentions. Velthak stared at the screen in shock. This human not only spoke his language perfectly, but used formal military protocols that took Dominion officers years to master. The implications crashed over him like a cold wave, but his pride and training wouldn't let him back down. Impossible, he snarled, standing up from his command chair. You're nothing but primitives playing with technology you don't understand. Surrender your world now, and your species will serve the Dominion as slaves. Resist, and we will destroy every city on your planet. The human admiral's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes that made Velthak suddenly uncomfortable. Kim turned slightly to speak to someone off-screen, and Velthak could see more humans working at stations filled with technology that looked centuries ahead of his own equipment. Captain Min-Ho Lee stood on the bridge of the human escort vessel, Thunder, watching the alien commander's threats with a mixture of amusement and concern. At 34 years old, Lee had spent his entire military career training for this exact situation. He had studied every known alien species, learned their tactics, and prepared for the day when humanity would have to defend itself. Admiral, Lee reported over the communication channel, enemy fleet is moving into attack formation. They're charging weapons and raising shields. Lee's tactical officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Eugene Choi, looked up from her console. Sir, their weapon systems are exactly what we expected. Standard plasma cannons, particle beam arrays, and kinetic projectiles. Nothing we haven't seen before in our intelligence reports. Lee nodded. For over 200 years, Humanity had been watching and learning from every alien civilization in this part of the galaxy. They knew the Dominion's weapons, their shield technology, their ship designs, and their tactical patterns. The aliens, meanwhile, knew absolutely nothing about human capabilities. Back on the Aegis, Admiral Kim received Lee's report and turned back to face the alien commander on his screen. His expression remained calm, but there was steel in his voice when he spoke. "Commander Velthak," Kim said, and the alien's shock at hearing his name spoken aloud was visible on his face. "You are operating under outdated information. Earth is not the primitive world described in your ancient archives." Lieutenant Yoon-ji Park stepped closer to her admiral, ready to relay his next message to the alien fleet. She had spent years studying Dominion psychology and knew exactly how their military commanders would react to having their assumptions challenged. "Inform the Dominion fleet," Kim said quietly, "that this is their only warning. We are not the primitive species they expected to find. They have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully and return to their own territory." Park opened the communication channel and delivered the message in perfect Dominion military language, using formal diplomatic protocols that made it clear Earth was not making a desperate plea, but issuing an official warning between equals. Velthak's response was exactly what every human officer had predicted. His pride wounded and his easy victory slipping away, the alien commander made the worst possible decision. With a roar of fury, he ordered his fleet to attack the human vessels, convinced that superior numbers and firepower would quickly end this embarrassing situation. What happened next would change everything. The galaxy thought it knew about the small blue planet called Earth. Lies and deception, Commander Velthak screamed across the communication channel, his four eyes blazing with rage and wounded pride. The idea that these primitive humans could challenge the mighty Dominion was an insult he couldn't tolerate. "You think your pathetic tricks will save you? Open fire, destroy them all." The Dominion fleet responded instantly to their commander's orders. 180 warships turned their weapons toward the human vessels, their hulls bristling with the kind of firepower that had conquered dozens of worlds. Plasma cannons that burned hotter than stars charged to full power. Particle beam arrays that could slice through solid metal like butter began to glow with deadly energy. Kinetic projectile launchers loaded with shells that could punch through. Mountain-sized asteroids prepared to fire. The first volley was devastating. Enough energy to glass an entire continent erupted from the alien ships, streaking through space toward the human fleet in brilliant streams of destruction. These were weapons that had never failed before, weapons that had brought entire civilizations to their knees. The energy beams struck the human ships dead on, creating massive explosions of light that should have vaporized the vessels instantly. But as the light faded, the human ships hung in space completely undamaged. More than that, they looked like nothing had happened at all. No scorch marks, no hull damage, no signs that they had just been hit by enough firepower to destroy a small moon. "What?" Velthak stared at his tactical display in confusion. "Sensors, what happened to our weapons fire?" His sensor operator's voice shook as he replied, "Sir, the energy readings show our weapons hit their targets, but somehow the human ships are completely unaffected. It's like our attacks passed right through them without making contact." Velthak's mind raced. Maybe the humans had some kind of advanced shield technology, though he had never seen shields that could absorb that much energy without even flickering. He turned to his weapons officer, determined to overwhelm whatever protection the humans were using. "Double the firepower. All weapons. Continuous fire. I don't care what kind of shields they have, we'll break through them." The second attack was even more intense than the first. Every weapon on every Dominion ship fired at once, creating a storm of destructive energy that lit up space like a second sun. This time there was no way the human ships could survive, but once again the attack seemed to pass through the human vessels like light through glass. The ships remained perfectly intact, floating serenely in space as if they existed in a different dimension entirely. Commander Eugene Choi watched the alien attack from the bridge of her stealth frigate, the Phantom. At 29 years old, she was one of humanity's most brilliant weapons specialists, and she had spent the last 5 years perfecting the technology that was about to end this battle before it really began. "Phase shields holding perfectly," reported her engineering officer. The aliens' weapons are passing through our ships without making any contact with our actual hulls. Eugene nodded with satisfaction. The phase shield technology was one of humanity's greatest achievements, allowing their ships to exist slightly out of phase with normal space. Conventional weapons simply couldn't touch them while the shields were active. It was like trying to punch a ghost. But the real demonstration was about to begin. Admiral Kim, Eugene spoke into her communication device, requesting permission to deploy cascade field technology. "Permission granted, Commander," came Kim's calm reply. "Show them what humanity has learned." Eugene's fingers danced across her control panel, activating systems that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The cascade field generator, humanity's most closely guarded secret, began to hum with power. This wasn't just advanced technology, it was a completely different approach to physics that the rest of the galaxy had never imagined. "Deploying cascade field," she announced to her crew. Space around the Dominion fleet began to shimmer and bend in ways that made Velthak's eyes water just looking at it. The very fabric of reality seemed to twist and fold, creating patterns that his mind couldn't quite understand. Then the impossible happened. The Dominion ship's own weapons turned against them. Energy beams that had been fired at the human vessels suddenly curved back through space like boomerangs, striking the ships that had launched them. Plasma bolts reversed direction in mid-flight, returning to their sources with perfect accuracy. Kinetic projectiles spun around in impossible arcs, slamming back into the hulls of the ships that had fired them. But this wasn't random destruction. The redirected weapons struck with surgical precision, disabling engines and weapon systems, without killing the crews inside. Ship after ship went dark as their own firepower was turned against them in ways that violated every law of physics that Velthak thought he understood. "What's happening?" he screamed at his crew as his own flagship shuddered under the impact of its own weapons. "Why are our weapons attacking us?" His science officer, a normally calm individual who had served on dozens of campaigns, looked up from his instruments with terror in his eyes. "Sir, the humans are somehow manipulating gravitational fields on a scale I didn't think was possible. They're bending space-time itself, creating curves that redirect energy and matter along impossible paths." Within seconds, 60 of Velthak's most powerful warships had been disabled by their own weapons. The crews were alive but helpless, floating in space inside ships that no longer responded to their commands. The humans had demonstrated technology that made the Dominion's most advanced science look like children playing with toys. "Impossible," Velthak whispered, staring at the tactical display that showed most of his fleet disabled or drifting powerless. "Our archives said these humans were primitive. They were supposed to be using stone tools and living in mud huts. How do they have technology that we don't even understand?" Admiral Kim's voice cut through Velthak's panic like a blade, calm. Hands steady despite having just witnessed his fleet's easy victory turn into a complete disaster. "Your archives, Commander Velthak," Kim said with quiet authority, "said exactly what we wanted them to say." The truth hit Velthak like a physical blow. The survey data, the reports of primitive humans, the classification of Earth as a low-risk target. It had all been carefully crafted deception. Humanity had been manipulating galactic records for centuries, maintaining the illusion of being a backward species while secretly developing technology that surpassed anything the galaxy had ever seen. As Velthak stared at his ruined fleet, one terrible question burned in his mind. If humans could do this to his ships, what else were they capable of? The transport beam that brought Commander Velthak aboard the human flagship was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Instead of the rough, disorienting sensation of Dominion teleportation technology, this felt smooth and gentle, as if he was being carefully lifted by invisible hands. Even in his defeat, the aliens were showing him technology that his people couldn't match. When the beam faded, Velthak found himself standing in a corridor that took his breath away. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of living metal that shifted and flowed like liquid while remaining perfectly solid. Soft light came from everywhere and nowhere, creating an atmosphere that was both welcoming and subtly intimidating. Everything around him whispered of technology so advanced that he couldn't even begin to understand how it worked. 2 human guards escorted him through the ship, and Velthak was struck by how calm and professional they were. These weren't the savage primitives he had expected to conquer. They moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing and had trained for years to do it perfectly. The conference room where they brought him was even more impressive than the corridor. A large table made of the same flowing metal dominated the center of the room, surrounded by chairs. That looked comfortable enough for beings of any species. But it was the humans sitting around the table that truly terrified Velthak. These officers didn't look like warriors who had just won a battle. They looked like scientists and diplomats who had been expecting this meeting for decades. Their calm competence was more frightening than any weapon because it told him that everything that had just happened was exactly what they had planned. Admiral Kim sat at the head of the table, his hands folded calmly in front of him. To his right sat a woman who looked to be in her early 50s, with the kind of quiet intelligence in her eyes that Velthak associated with the galaxy's greatest minds. To Kim's left was Captain Min-Ho Lee, the officer whose ship had helped disable half of Velthak's fleet. "Please sit down, Commander," Admiral Kim said politely, gesturing to a chair that adjusted itself to accommodate Velthak's alien physiology. "We have a great deal to discuss." Velthak remained standing, his pride still battling with his growing fear. "I am a prisoner of war. I demand to be treated according to galactic conventions." The woman to Kim's right smiled gently. "Commander, you're not a prisoner. You're a guest. My name is Dr. So Young Han, and I'm the chief scientist for Earth's Defense Forces. We brought you here because we want you to understand what really happened today." Dr. Han stood up and walked to what Velthak had thought was a blank wall. At her touch, the wall transformed into a massive holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Stars and planets floated in midair, connected by lines that showed trade routes and communication networks. 200 years ago, Dr. Han began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades studying this subject, humanity discovered that we weren't alone in the universe. A damaged ship from the Centauri Republic crash-landed on our moon. We could have announced ourselves to the galaxy then, demanded our place among the spacefaring civilizations. The holographic display zoomed in on Earth, showing the blue planet, as it would have appeared 2 centuries ago. Velthak could see the obvious signs of a developing civilization, cities, roads, the beginnings of industrial technology. Instead, Dr. Han continued, we made a choice. We decided to watch and learn from the shadows. We studied every species, every civilization, every piece of technology that we could find, and we discovered something very interesting. The display changed, showing the technological development of dozens of different species over thousands of years. Velthak recognized the progression patterns of the Dominion, the Hegemony, the Stellar Confederation, and dozens of other civilizations. Every species in the galaxy follows the same basic path, Dr. Han explained, pointing to the similar curves on the display. You discover fire, then metallurgy, then electricity, then nuclear power, then you reach space. Once you're in space, you all make the same choices. Bigger ships, stronger weapons, faster drives, it's all very predictable. Captain Lee leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on Velthak's face. The problem is, predictable means limited. When everyone follows the same path, everyone hits the same barriers, everyone makes the same mistakes. The holographic display shifted again, showing human technological development alongside the galactic norm. But humanity's path was completely different. Where other species showed steady, predictable advancement, human progress jumped in unexpected directions, exploring areas that other civilizations had never even considered. Humanity took different roads, Lee continued. While your people were perfecting plasma cannons that burn hotter and hit harder, we were learning how to phase matter so that energy weapons couldn't touch us at all. While you were building bigger and bigger dreadnoughts, we were figuring out how to fold space and create pocket dimensions where we could hide entire fleets. Dr. Han touched the display again, and it showed the battle that had just ended. Velthak watched his own fleet's weapons curve back through impossible angles to strike their own ships, and he still couldn't understand how the humans had made it happen. Your people spent 1,000 years learning to shoot straighter and hit harder, Dr. Hunt said. We spent 200 years learning to bend reality itself. While you were competing with each other to build the most powerful weapons, we were discovering that the most powerful defense is to exist slightly outside normal space where weapons can't reach you. Admiral Kim stood up and walked around the table to face Velthak directly. The human was shorter than the alien commander, but his presence filled the room in a way that made Velthak feel small. Do you understand what this means, Commander? Kim asked quietly. Every primitive species that your people dismissed and ignored had the potential to take completely different approaches to technology. While you were all following the same predictable paths, some of us were exploring entirely new possibilities. The Famdi. Full implications of what Kim was saying crashed over Velthak like a tidal wave. If humanity could develop this kind of technology in just 2 centuries of secret development, what about other species that the galaxy had written off as backward or primitive? How many other civilizations were hiding capabilities that could reshape the balance of power? The galaxy's primitive species, Admiral Kim concluded, his words carrying a weight that made Velthak's legs feel weak, became its most advanced civilization. Your people just never bothered to look beyond your own assumptions. Velthak finally sank into the chair that had been offered to him, his mind reeling with the enormity of what he had learned. Everything he thought he knew about the galaxy, about technology, about the natural order of civilizations, had been turned upside down in the space of a single conversation. The humans weren't just more advanced than he had expected. They had become something entirely beyond his people's understanding, and they had done it while remaining completely invisible to galactic civilization. The question that terrified him most was simple. What did they plan to do with that power? Admiral Kim walked slowly around the conference table, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet room. Commander Velthak sat slumped in his chair, still trying to process everything he had learned about humanity's true capabilities. The weight of the decision Kim was about to make pressed down on everyone present, because they all understood that the next few minutes would determine the fate of 2 entire civilizations. Commander Velthak, Kim said finally, stopping directly in front of the alien officer, you now know the truth about Earth and humanity. That knowledge puts us all in a very difficult position. Velthak looked up, his 4 eyes meeting Kim's steady gaze. The alien commander had spent his entire career believing that the Dominion was the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Now he sat on a ship that used technology so far beyond his understanding that it might as well have been magic. What? What are you going to do with me? Velthak asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kim's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that reminded Velthak that these humans had just disabled 60 warships without breaking a sweat. Whatever decision Kim made, Velthak had no power to change it. You have 2 choices, Commander, Kim said, his words carrying the weight of 2 worlds' futures. The first choice is simple. You return to your Dominion with a message. Earth remains classified as low risk in your archives, and the galaxy continues to respect our isolation. Your people leave us alone, and we leave your people alone. Velthak felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could return home, report that Earth was too well defended to conquer, and recommend that the Dominion find easier targets elsewhere. It wouldn't be the glorious victory he had planned, but it would keep him alive and his fleet intact. But then Kim's expression hardened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Or, the human admiral continued, we reveal the truth to the galaxy. We show every civilization exactly what humanity has become. How would your mighty Dominion react to learning that the mud-dwelling primitives they dismissed have surpassed their greatest technological achievements? The question hit Velthak like a physical blow. He tried to imagine how the Dominion leadership would respond to such news. The proud warrior culture that had built an empire spanning hundreds of worlds, learning that they had been surpassed by a species they considered barely above animals. Lieutenant Colonel J.1 Park stepped forward from where he had been standing, quietly near the wall. At 38 years old, Park was humanity's leading expert on galactic politics and military strategy. He had spent 15 years studying how different alien civilizations reacted to threats to their perceived superiority. "Commander," Park said gently, "I've studied your people's history for decades. The Dominion has gone to war over much smaller insults to their pride. 300 years ago, they destroyed the Kelvani homeworld because the Kelvani ambassadors refused to bow properly during a diplomatic ceremony." Velthak's stomach turned as he remembered that particular chapter of Dominion history. The Kelvani had been a peaceful trading civilization, but their cultural customs didn't include the deep bows that Dominion protocol demanded. The war that followed had lasted only 6 months, but it had ended with an entire species extinct. "Civilizations have fallen for less than what we're talking about here," Park continued. "Pride is a dangerous thing, especially when it's been wounded. If the galaxy learns that humanity has been secretly watching and surpassing them for centuries, how many wars do you think will start? How many species will demand that Earth be destroyed, not because we're a threat, but because our existence makes them feel small?" Dr. So Young Han activated the holographic display again, showing the current political map of the galaxy. Dozens of different civilizations, hundreds of worlds, all connected by a complex web of alliances, trade agreements, and ancient grudges. "The balance of power in this galaxy is very delicate," she explained. "If humanity's true capabilities become known, every major civilization will have to choose sides. Some will want to ally with us. Others will want to destroy us before we become too powerful. Either way, the result will be the largest war this galaxy has ever seen." Velthak stared at the display, watching the colored regions that represented different empires and federations. He could easily imagine how those neat boundaries would dissolve into chaos if humanity's secret became public knowledge. The Dominion alone would mobilize every ship they had, not to conquer Earth, but to prevent other species from gaining access to human technology. "Billions would die," he whispered, finally understanding the full scope of what Kim was offering him. "Billions," Kim agreed solemnly. "Maybe trillions before it was over. And for what? So that various alien governments could prove they're still the most advanced species in the galaxy?" Captain Minho Lee, who had been listening quietly, spoke up from his position at the table. "That's why we stayed hidden, Commander. Not because we were afraid of the galaxy, but because we were afraid for it. Some secrets are too dangerous to reveal." Kim walked back to his chair and sat down, his decision made. "So, Commander Velthak, what will it be? Do you return home with the understanding that Earth prefers to remain undisturbed, or do we show the galaxy what we've really become and let the consequences fall where they may?" Velthak closed his eyes and tried to think clearly. His military training told him to report everything he had seen, to warn the Dominion about humanity's capabilities so they could prepare for a potential threat. But his conscience and his survival instincts told him something different. If he revealed the truth, the Dominion would go to war. Other species would be forced to choose sides. The galaxy would burn, and it would be his fault for bringing this information home. He started, then stopped and tried again. "I will tell my superiors that Earth's defenses are stronger than expected. I will recommend that the Dominion seek expansion opportunities elsewhere. The archives will remain unchanged." Kim nodded slowly. "A wise choice, Commander. Your fleet will be repaired and supplied for the journey home. Your crews will be treated well until you're ready to depart." Over the next 3 days, Velthak watched human engineering teams work on his damaged ships. The technology they used was so advanced that his own engineers could barely understand what they were seeing, but the humans were careful to make all repairs using conventional methods that wouldn't reveal their true capabilities. When it came time to update Earth's file in the Galactic Archives, Velthak stared at the entry screen for a long time before typing, "Low risk, quarantine recommended. Defensive capability stronger than anticipated. Recommend avoiding this system for routine expansion operations." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough truth to keep both civilizations safe. Standing on the bridge of the Aegis, Admiral Kim watched the Dominion fleet disappear into hyperspace, carrying Velthak and his crews back to their empire. Lieutenant Yunji Park stood beside him, monitoring communications to ensure the alien ships made it safely out of the solar system. Do you think he'll keep his word? Park asked quietly. Kim was silent for a moment, watching the last traces of the alien ships fade from his senses. I think he understands what's at stake, but even if he doesn't, we'll be ready. Captain Lee joined them on the bridge, his tactical report complete. All human vessels have returned to stealth mode. As far as any long-range sensors are concerned, this system looks exactly like it did before the Dominion arrived. Good, Kim said. Maintain the masquerade. Let the galaxy continue to think we're still primitive farmers and craftsmen playing with simple tools. And if they don't? Lee asked, echoing the question that had been in everyone's mind since this confrontation began. What if someone else decides to test our defenses? What if word gets out despite Velthak's promise? Kim turned away from the viewing screen and looked at his officers, these men and women who had dedicated their lives to protecting Earth and preserving the peace of the galaxy. His smile was grim but determined. Then the galaxy learns why we chose to stay hidden in the first place, he said quietly, and they discover that sometimes the most dangerous species is the one that everyone underestimates, the blue planet. Earth continued to spin peacefully in space, looking exactly like the primitive world described in the Galactic archives. But now, hidden in the shadows of its solar system, humanity maintained its silent watch over the galaxy, guardians that no one knew existed, protectors of a peace that depended on a secret that must never be revealed, at least not yet.